Many of the guys on tour with us were in the room across the hall from me drinking and smoking with a bunch of girls from the show. Most of the girls said they were students from a local university and explained how their parents were very strict with them growing up and had sheltered them as children. That's one thing I've learned being on the road with rappers for many years, is that the story you hear from women in each city is pretty much the same. Many come from middle to upper class homes where their parents tried to shelter them and were overprotected, which is how they ended up in a hotel room with a bunch of guys from the Wu-Tang Clan at 4 a.m. Do not shelter your daughters, because I can guarantee where many of them will end up. After some chit-chat and some drinks, everybody started to get a little closer, and the shirts and bras were coming off the ladies in the room. There was one girl who was exceptionally hot that 2 or 3 of the guys were having a go with. She had spent the previous 15 minutes talking about what her boyfriend would do if he found out what she was up to. That poor guy. After 20 years of working as an agent and a concert promoter, you simply become immune to the absurdity of these situations. So I just sat and watched what was going on with a beer in one hand and a blunt in the other. Once things started to get really going, I simply excused myself and went back to my own room and was going to turn in for the night. Just as I was getting settled in my room, Delroy, who was Ghostface's tour manager, called me and asked me to come up to his room to give him the food per diem money for all the guys which I'd been holding on to from earlier that night. When I opened the door to Delroy's hotel room, it was like a sauna in there with steam dripping off the mirrors and windows. As I walked further into the room, I was greeted by an attractive white girl in her late 20s who was in the process of putting her clothes back on. While she was getting dressed, I noticed a Ziploc bag on the floor and some saran wrap. I sort of kicked the bag with my shoe to see if it was some weed that had fallen onto the floor. Delroy looked at me and said, "I wouldn't touch that bag if I was you." I leaned closer to the floor to get a better look at what was in the bag and noticed some sort of white liquid in there. I then immediately looked at Delroy, who had a devilish grin on his face, and the two of us broke out into hysterical laughter. He explained that he couldn't find a condom, so he got creative and used a combination of a Ziploc bag and the saran wrap you see on top of the champagne bucket in your hotel room as a condom. Once the girl was dressed and I had given Delroy the food money, he asked me if I knew where the rest of the guys were, so I told him about the party that was going on downstairs on the floor below. He asked me to walk with him and the woman downstairs so we could put her in a cab and send her on her way, and then to lead him to where the rest of the action was happening on my floor. As soon as we opened the door of the room with all the girls in it, Delroy didn't hesitate for 1 second and immediately jumped right into the action. It reminded me if you've ever gone to somebody's house with a pool, and instead of chit-chatting a little upon your arrival before you go into the pool, you just immediately take your clothes off and dive in without any hesitation. That's pretty much what Delroy did. I left Delroy with the guys somewhere between 4:30 and 5 a.m. and went back to my room to try to catch some sleep. I got a few hours of sleep, but was awoken the following morning to Delroy pounding on my door at about 9:30 a.m. I slid out of bed and opened the door for Delroy, who walked into my room with yet another woman. She introduced herself to me as Delroy's friend that he met last night. This wasn't the woman we put into the cab, nor was she any of the girls that were at the party I had mentioned. Out of curiosity, I asked exactly where they'd met, and she explained that they had met getting some food at a late-night pizza spot and that she'd gone back to the room and spent the night with Delroy. He was smiling like a Cheshire cat. She was his third of the night. I got to admit, I was pretty impressed with Delroy's stamina. I'm Chris McKee. Don't forget, you can check out my book, Life on the Road with the Wu-Tang Clan, available now on Amazon.com in the United States and Amazon.ca in Canada.